on Chav Zayin Amid Beis, that would be 27b3 on the third page with the words by the two dots, Rabbi Yehuda Oima Ein Beer. And the Gemara over here is going back to the Mishnah that we started the parak with on Daf Chaf Aleph on Daf 21, where in the Mishnah it said, Rabbi Yehuda said, Ein beer chametz ela serefa. Disposing of chametz is only done through burning. The Chachamim said, no, af mifra v'zareya l'ruach, you can crumble it and throw it into the air, or matul liyam, or cast it into the sea, i.e. that would be the Yam HaMelach, the Dead Sea. So, back to our daf, 27b3, Chav Zayin Amud Beis, in the middle of the daf. Rabbi Yehuda ain't beer, except disposing of chametz is only through burning. Tanya Megalent in a brayso. We learned in a brayso. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, ain't beer chametz ela sereifa. The disposing of chametz is only through a fire. How do I know this? Vadin noisen. And if we use our logic through a kal v'chayma, we can come to it. Once again, another kal v'chayma. Uma noiser. Madach noiser. And again, noiser is kabanis who have overstayed their time limit for eating. So now the bahanoisa means the leftover that has not been eating has to be burnt. Uma noiser she'ena b'bal yirah b'al yamotza. Now, noisa does not have a din of it shall not be seen, it shall not be found, which of course we have by chametz. Nonetheless, to an sereifa needs burning. Chametz, which does have, of course, the prohibition, it shall not be seen and shall not be found. Ain't din like kol sheken shetuna sereifa is not certain that, of course, it should need elimination by burning. So on this, Amulai came the Rabbanan and said, Rabbi Yehuda, no, it's not a good kal v'chayma. Kol din shata don tchilose lahachme v'soife lahakil ain't din. A kal v'chayma biological is kal l'motza chaymer. Only you find a leniency that now can be applied to a stringency. If madach, the leniency has this thing, certainly the stringency must also have this thing. But where you start trying to find from a leniency to a stringency, and along the way it messes up, and you end up back with another leniency, obviously the argument doesn't work. And the Gemara here says, what are you trying to do? Loi motzi eitzim l'sarfai. According to you, what happens if somebody can't find wood to burn the chametz? If the only way that he can go destroy chametz is by burning, and so let's say he's leaving his house 25 days early. He's flying off to Eretz Yisrael, Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, 2 weeks early, 15 days early. So he wants to get rid of his chametz, and he can't find wood. So according to this, he's stuck, favuched. He can't be mekayim the mitzvah. He just leaves it in his house. And it's not the time of bittul, because bittul is only on Erev Pesach. So loy matzah eitzim l'sarfa. If he can't find, should he just sit there and idly just be mevatel and not fulfill the mitzvah of eliminating his chametz? But the Torah says, tashbisu sa'ar b'batechem. You shall eliminate the leaven that's in your home. The leaven, that means anything, any product that could create, like yeast and everything else, in which we learn out to actual bread, actual cakes, that is in your home. B'chol dover, it says, tashbisu sa'ar b'batechem. You shall eliminate from your homes, the leaven from your homes. B'chol dover she'ate yochel hashbisa. With anything, in any matter that you can eliminate it. So now, what according to you, if the only way you can eliminate it is by burning, it could turn out a guy who's leaving early got no way out. Chazer Rabbi Yehuda v'donai dinach. He said, I'll learn it out a different way. Noiser asa b'achila. Noiser leftovers, which passes its time. For an example, if a carbon only has Yom V'Layla could only eat of the day of its sacrifice plus the next night. So by the next morning, it's already nice and left over and it needs to be burnt. And it also has, not only can it not be burnt, not only should it be burnt, which is a mitzvah saseh, the nicer should be burnt, but we learned earlier that there's also a mitzvah loy saseh, a negative prohibition that you shall not eat. Noisa also ba'achilo. Noisa, the leftovers are prohibited from eating. The chametz also ba'achila, and chametz is obviously also ba'achila on Pesach. Ma noisa b'sreifo, just like noisa is with sreifo. We're now on 27b4. Ma noisa b'sreifo, just like noisa, the leftovers are disposed of through burning. Av chametz b'sreifo. Listen, now we've got my proof. Okay, we got a good argument to say that chametz is burnt by sereifa only. Amrullah, on this came the Rabbanon and said, no, nevela techiach. Nevela will demonstrate that just because you have a prohibition from eating, that it's also ba'achila. It does not mean that just because it's also ba'achila that you now have to burn it and then you're getting rid of it. What is a nevela? Nachamo, a nevela is a kosher animal that died without the proper shechita, without the proper slaughtering, or a non-kosher animal that died and the carcass is a nevela. And we said that the word of nevela cannot be eaten, but it is allowed to have benefit because you're allowed to either give it away as a gift to the ger, to the stranger among you, or to sell to the adulterer. But anyways, nevela techiach, nevela will show that you cannot eat, but its disposal does not require burning. She'asura ba'achila, it's also ba'achila to eat. Ve'ein tununa sereifa, but does not require sereifa, because in fact you're allowed to give it away as a gift or sell it. So you see that what it called, you have, if you go according to this, you have no proof that chametz needs to be burned, because here's the case. Also, that's also ba'achila. It's also to eat, and you don't, and its disposal is not through burning. Amalehan, so Yehuda says, that's not a problem. Hafresh, there's a difference. Noiser is also ba'achila ubehana. Nevela and nevela, as opposed to nevela, which you are allowed to have benefit from by giving it away as a gift or selling it. Noiser, there is no benefit. You cannot have any benefit. Leftovers are not allowed to be eaten. You're not allowed to have any benefit. The chametz also ba'achila ba'ana, and chametz is also to eat, and it's also to have benefit from it. So that's a much better comparison. Ma noisa toin sereifa. Just like noisa requires burning, av chametz toin sereifa. So chametz requires burning. Amaloi, the Rabbanan said, no, it still does no proof. Kishar haniskol yachiach. The case of the shar that killed the person. So you remember the shar haniskol, the shar that gets stoned, the ox that gets stoned. You'll see from over there, which you're not allowed to eat. We said you're not allowed to eat from its meat. First of all, it didn't have a proper shechita, but anyways, you can't eat from it, right? And you can't have benefit from it, but you still don't have to get rid of it by burning. The shar haniskol is also from consuming food and from having any benefit from it. Im but it still doesn't need burning. So therefore, it's something that you're not allowed to eat, you can't have benefit, but you don't have to go ahead and burn it. You don't have to go ahead and burn it. So chametz should be the same thing. Who said I gotta burn it? Amalahan, Rabbi Yehuda said no. Hafresh, I still got a difference. Noisa, the leftover food, the food that overstayed. It was only good for a day and a night, and now it's left over and it's got to be burned. Noisa is also ba'achila, it's also from eating, ubehana, and from having benefit, va'inish karis. And if you don't burn it and you eat it, the einish is karis to be cut off. Chametz is the same thing. Also ba'achila, you're not allowed to eat it. Ubehana, you're not allowed to have benefit. And if you do eat from chametz, einish karis, the einish is karis. So it's a good, much better comparison to noisa. Ma noisa b'sereifa, chametz b'sereifa. Just like noisa is eliminated through burning, so chametz is also eliminated through burning. Perfectly good proof. Amalai came to Chazal and said, no. The fats from the shar haniskol, from the stoned ox, will prove me wrong. Because over there, You can't eat. You're not allowed to eat the fats. You can't have benefit from it. And if you do eat the fats of it, you do get chorus. Nonetheless, you don't have to destroy it by burning. You can bury it. It's also to eat. And for benefit. Chorus. And if you do eat from it, you do get chorus. You don't have to burn it, you can bury it. So now we're on top of Chav Ches Amud Aleph, which is the actual daf 28a, 28a1 in the art scroll, which is the Shabbos' daf. So therefore we have no proof. Ain't doing in Serefa. So just like this, just like the chalev, the fats of the shor hanisko can't be eaten, can't have benefit, and is chayiv kares, so too chametz can't eat, can't have benefit, is chayiv kares, just like the shor hanisko. The fats of the shor hanisko you don't have to burn, so too chametz you don't have to burn. So what's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with this? Rabbi Yehuda v'donei dinach. So he learned a different thing. He said, Noisa, besides having, can't eat, you can't have benefit, and it's chayiv kares if you do eat. It has one more thing. It has a fourth thing. Sheyesh b'baal seisiru. It's subject to the prohibition. It shall not be left over. Obviously, it says it shall be burnt, and you shall not eat it. You can't leave it over. The chametz b'baal seisiru. And chametz says also you shouldn't be left over. You shall not see it. You shall not find it. It shall not be in your property. It shall not be left over in your property. Ma noisa b'sreifa. Av chametz b'sreifa. Because now I've got four things: no eating, no benefits, kares, and no leaving over. Chametz got the same thing. So just like noisa, which has all four things, doesn't have to be burned. Chametz shouldn't have to be burnt either. Just like noisa has to be burnt. Chametz has to be burnt. Amulai Chazal will say, no, still no good. Ashum Tolui, the nicer of an Ashum Tolui. What's an Ashum Tolui? A person is not sure whether he did an Aveira, whether he did a sin that requires him to bring a sin offering, requires him to bring a Chatos. So since he's not sure, he brings what's known as an Ashum Tolui, a suspension Oshui. It's a carbon that suspends punishment min hashamayim. That means I'm not sure, Rabbi Shalom, whether I was over or not. I'm covering my bets. I'm bringing the carbon just in case. So it holds it. And then if he remembers that he taka really was over on an Aveira, obviously b'shagi, inadvertently, then he would go back and bring a real chatas, a real sin offering. Now, the nicer of an Asham Toli, okay, again, the Asham Toli has a time frame of what it could be eaten, a day and a night. The next day, it's nice, it's left over. Now, Asham Toli, the chatas ha'oif habo ala sofik, and the chatas ha'oif that's brought on a sofik, this is in the case of a woman who had a miscarriage, but she's not sure it's a real miscarriage. She's not sure if there was anything there or not anything there. So now we know already that a woman who has a child who has a real miscarriage has to bring two kabbanas, an oila and a chatas. The oila is kula l'Hashem; it gets burned completely on all oilas get completely burned, and the chatas is something that has to be brought for the sin. And the Gemara in other places said, what's the sin? Is that when a woman has a child, she says things b'shas ma'isa when she's all in pain and all that, and then she has to go ahead and bring a sin offering, whatever. The Gemara brings many reasons. In short, she's not sure what the situation is. So the oil she brings, and she makes it tanai. She says as follows: if it was a real child, then this oil applies to that child. And if not, then it's a nedova. It's a, what do you call it? It's an offering on my part. It's a contribution because there is something called nidvas oilo. You're allowed to contribute an oilo. Mashenken chatos doesn't work that way. Chatos is something that you must bring if you did an avera. There is no charitable chatos. So, and here's the problem: if you bring the chatos, and you didn't need to bring the chatos, then you're over on chulin ba'azara. having brought something unsacred into the courtyard, which is a terrible issa, it's a terrible lot that we talked about before. So nonetheless, from different psukim, we learned that in a suffix case, and this is the exception to that rule, she brings the chatas as a suffix. She brings the chatas as a suffix. But nonetheless, the chatas happens to be a bird. Since it's a bird, the way they were shechted in the base of Migdash is by malika, with the nail on the top part of the neck. Essentially, they broke the neck. And that obviously is not a good shechita in terms of normal eating. So the kohen would not be able to eat from that chatas. Good. So here's our cases. Amrullah, they told him, Oshim Toli, the nicer of an Oshim Toli, of an onshore, of a suspended Oshim, until I know for sure I was Oiv, or Chatas Oiv Abalasafik, or the Chatas Oiv, the bird or sin offering that was brought because of an uncertainty. She wasn't sure what the situation was. L'devarecha yochichu, by your own words, Rabbi Yehuda, by what you hold in those cases, Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to go ahead and contradict what you've been trying to say over here, that it's always with, that chametz has to be disposed with only with fire, only with burning, only with sereifa. Because shehain bebals hoisaysiru, because they too are also part of the prohibition. You shall not leave over. You can't leave it over. It's also got nicer. You can't leave it over. Okay? Sha'anu oimrim b'sereifa, that we say that they should be eliminated through burning. We, the Rabbanan, paskin, that the leftovers of there need to be gotten rid of by burning, by the Osham Tolik, by the suspended Osham, and by the uncertain bird sin offering. Va'ata, and you, Rabbi Yehuda, in a case of where there is no leaving over, we all agree that's all got a time frame. You nonetheless say, bikavura, it could be buried, it doesn't need to be burned. So you see, you could do disposal, even in a case of where it's Baba Baal Siru, where you can't leave over, you can still, according to your own psak, you could do it, you can dispose of it not by burning, but by burying it. Shasek Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was quiet. He said, you're right, my own words just trapped me. That's it. Amar Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef says, Hainu di Amri Inchi, Kappa de Chatanag Nagora, the dish that the craftsman hollowed out, that made, Begavo Nisroiv Chardala. It will burn his tongue with a plate of mustard. In other words, from his own handiwork, he's going to burn his own tongue. Amar Abaya, Sadona Besade Yosef, when the shackle maker, I mean the guy who makes the chains, sits in his own chains in prison, because now he was caught as a ganef, Madvul Yidei Mishtalim, through his own handiwork, he's paid, he's repaid. From the chains that he himself made, he ended up in jail with his own chains. Rav Amma, Gayora Begire Miktil, when the arrow maker is killed by his own arrows, Midvil Yidei Mishtalim, through his own work, he's been repaid. The idea being that, of course, Rabbi Yehuda, you made all these arguments, and we have to burn, we got to burn, and if it's left over, we got to burn, the whole thing. And now you see yourself, you hold that it doesn't have to be burned. And why 3 cases? Because each of these are a higher level one of the other. Saying there are times when somebody learns something and something else that he learns is a contradiction. So that's the kind of case where he gets burnt, like with the mustard seeds, from his own argument. But he can get out of it. He can work his way out of it. Abaye says worse than that. Sometimes it gets more that you're really chained in with your own chains, your own argument. But if you can pick the lock, you can get out. But if you get murdered by your own thing, it means that your argument against yourself was so good that you farfutched yourself. So we end up at the end of the day that though Rabbi Yehuda says that chametz is done only through burning, in fact, that's not the case. It can be done in any which way, because even Rabbi Yehuda slugs himself up from where he holds over there by Oshum Toli and a Chatas Oif, that over there, even though those two are also not allowed to be left over, they're not allowed to be left over. Nonetheless, Rabbi Yehuda says they can be buried. If that's the case, if I got a case like that, I could say the same thing by chametz. Now we come to the next piece. The way we hold, Befered v'zarei, you can crumble the chametz and throw it to the air, or you can cast it into the sea, i.e., the Yam HaMelech. the salt sea, the Dead Sea. Iboyalahu. They inquired, Hey Chikama, what is the Mishnah exactly saying? Is the Mishnah saying, Mefared v'zoyrei l'ruach u'mefared u'matu l'yam? Is it saying you have to crumble the chametz and then you can scatter it into the air, or you have to crumble the chametz and then you can throw it into the sea? Dilma, mefared v'zoyrei l'ruach. You have to crumble it and then you can throw it into the sea. Avo matu l'yam be'enei. But in throwing it into the sea, you can throw it in the way it is as a full piece of bread. You don't have to crumble it up. So Zogti Gemara, but Nami, we have the same issue. Gabi avoid zara ki I gavna. Like this. The Mishnah says in avoid zara. Rabbi Yosi Omer, shoychek v'zoyra l'ruach. He grind. If a guy has an idol for whatever reason, buys a house, they leave over the idol. He grinds shoychek v'zoreya l'ruach. He grinds up the idol into dust and scatters the dust into the wind, or mata liyam, or throws it into the sea. Iboyaluhu, hey chikama. What is Rabbi Yossi saying? Shoychek v'zoreya l'ruach v'shoychek l'mata liyam. Is he saying you have to grind it down and then you can throw it into the air, or you have to grind it down and then you can throw it into the sea? So either way, you need grinding. Dilma, you have to grind it down and throw it into the air, into the wind. But if you throw it into the yam, that's fine. If you throw it into the yam, that's fine. You could throw it in intact. You could throw the idol in intact. Amar Rabba. Rabba said, Mistabro, avoid zara liyama melech cause. That the avoid zara, what are we talking about? It goes to the Dead Sea. It goes to the Yama Melech, the Sea of Salt, the Dead Sea for disposal. Why? Because the Dead Sea does not have ships and people there. Today, yes, it's a place to go where people go to bathe for refuah, for medicinal purposes. But at the time of the Gemara, they really did not go there. Certainly what was not going there was sea boats, ships. Ships were not going there. Loi boyish chika, that does not require grinding down to when you throw into the sea, because there are no boats in the Yam HaMelech. Chometz, the l'shan is causal, but chometz, which is thrown into many different rivers, many different waters, it doesn't just go to the Yam HaMelech. Boyi priru, that requires crushing it up and crumbling it down, because there are other people on those rivers, and on those rivers, they see some bread, they might fish it out. So we don't want to do that. Obviously, chametz on Pesach. Amalei Rav Yosef, I can go the other way. Adarabba, ipcham estabra, avoid zara deloy memisa, an idol which does not disintegrate in water, boya shechika, requires grinding down. Chametz, the mimis, chametz, bread, which you throw into the water, disintegrates, like boya prirer, does not require crumbling. Gemara says, Tani Kabbasid the Rabba, but Tani Kabbasid the Rabbi Yosef. We learned it two different ways. Rabbi Rabba, again, is the one that says chametz, which goes into a lot of different waterways where there are people, needs crumbling. The idol, which goes onto the Yam HaMelech, does not need it. And Rabbi Yosef says just the opposite. Since an idol does not disintegrate in water, it needs grinding. But chametz that disintegrates doesn't need crumbling. Okay, sorry, 1 minute. Let me fix the camera. There we go. So Tani Kabbasid the Rabba, Tani Kabbasid the Rabbi Yosef. Tani Kabbasid the Rabba, that it's the chametz that needs the crumbling and the way the Zara does not. If somebody was in the desert and he needs, now he has his chametz on him and it's Erev Pesach and he needs to get rid of his chametz. He should crush it up, crumble it, and scatter it into the wind. If he's traveling in a boat, in a ship, he should crumble it up and cast it into the sea. So we see, according to this, that chametz requires crumbling even when you throw it into the sea, like Rabbah. We are now on 28A3. Tani Kabbasid Rabbi Yosef. We learned the Rabbi Yosef. If one was traveling in the desert and he needs to get rid of an avodah zara, an idol, some reason he banged a bunch of Arabs and they thought they were being nice and they gave him an idol. This is before before Muhammad and Islam, way before. So the Arabs were all Ovid Avodah Zarah. And he has an Avodah Zarah. He needs to grind it down and scatter it into the wind. But if he's traveling on a ship, he grinds it and casts it into the sea. We see from over here, no matter where an idol is, it has to be ground down before you throw it into the sea. So it's like the Gemara, therefore, the brisa that says that you must grind down an idol no matter what is a kasha to Rabbah, because Rabbah says you put it into the Dead Sea and there are no ships there, you don't have to grind up the idol. Piru kasha to Rabbi Yosef, the brisa that said that you must crush chametz is a kasha to Rabbi Yosef, who said if you throw it into water, it disintegrates, you don't need to crush it up. Says the Gemara, shechika l'Rabbah lo kasha. Regarding grinding down the Avodah Zarah, this is not a question to Rabbah. Where Rabbah says you don't have to grind it down is when he was throwing it into the Yam HaMelach, into the Dead Sea, where no boats go and there's very few people. That does not require you to grind it down. Here we say you have to grind it down. It's every other sea. He's in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean, you got to grind it down because there's so many ships there. Pirul Rav Yosef, like Kasha, crumbling in the chametz is also no question to Rav Yosef. Ha-bechiti, the one who says that you must crumble it is when you're dealing with wheat kernels. So if you throw them into water, what happens to the wheat kernels? They don't dissolve. They expand. So obviously they need to be broken down and crumbled before you do it. Ha-binahama. Here we're talking about bread, cake. That stuff dissolves in water. That's not a problem. Very good. Zok the next Mishnah, the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Aleph. Chametz shel nachri, the chametz of a guy, sha'over olav ha-Pesach, over which Pesach has passed. We all know this. Winn-Dixie, Publix, chametz passed. Mutter b'hana is mutter for benefit. And the Gemara is going to actually say that lashon is very strange because we should say mutter b'achila, it's mutter be eating, right? And hana, so the Gemara is going to talk about it. The Shel Yisrael, but chametz that was in the possession of a Yid, of a Pesach. He blew it. He was over on Bal Yirah, Bal Yamotza, you shall not see, you shall not find. Didn't get rid of the chametz. The chametz was there. Asa b'ano. It's asa b'ano, shenema, because it says, lo yireh l'cho sa'ah. Leaven shall not be seen by you. Rashi says, Rashi in the Mishnah, the Gemara Mefarish Lo Mishum Kinosa. This is going to be a kanas. It's a penalty. The over oleh Mishum Bal Yirah, because you were over on Bal Yirah. You were over on the lav of Bal Yirah. Okay, maybe inadvertently, but you were over on the Bal Yirah. We're not going to let you to benefit from it that you can use it after Pesach. Because here's the thing. The emes of Eker Adin should be able to use it afterwards. Because here's the rule. Even though you're over on a lav and a prohibition, what took place still took place. The perfect example of this is if a kohen marries a gerusha. A kohen is not allowed, it's a lav, he's not allowed to marry a gerusha, a divorcee. Because a kohen gadol is not, certainly not. Okay? Not allowed to marry a divorcee. A kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. But if he marries a divorcee, the marriage is chal, it's a good marriage. It's true, he's over on a lav. Torah says you're not allowed to marry a divorcee. But if he marries the divorcee, the kinyan is chal. The transaction is good. The marriage is good. The children that come out of it are a chol. They can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But the marriage itself is good, despite the fact that he's over on a lav. So that's the fact. When you're over on a lav, doesn't mean that the byproduct of it isn't good. In this case, we're saying they're going to give you a kanas. We're going to penalize you, so you shouldn't benefit from having been over on Bal Yirah. Good. Stop the Gemara. You might have noticed that the Mishnah has no names over there. There are no Rabbeim. It doesn't say which Tane who said the Mishnah. Mani Masnisen. Stop the Gemara. Loi Rabbi Yehuda. It's not Rabbi Yehuda. But Loi Rab Shimon. It's not Rab Shimon. But Loi Rab Yossi Galili. And it's not Rab Yossi Galili. Okay, what's going on here? Mahi. What are we talking about? The Tanya, because we learned Chometz. Bein lefnei zamanoi. So when we say lefnei zamanoi, means before on Erev Pesach, before the seventh hour, before the seventh hour, which is the Isadi Araisa of Chametz, because in the seventh hour, the carbon Pesach is brought. And it says you shall not have Chametz with it, which we'll see the pasuk in a minute, with the carbon Pesach. Okay, so therefore, when the carbon Pesach is in play, Chametz is out of play, is now Aser. So Lefnei Zamane, that means before Pesach begins, but when the Isser Chametz began, which we say the seventh hour, the Gemara uses the Lashon, the sixth hour, which means after 6 hours have passed, and we are now beginning the seventh hour. So we're when we say the seventh hour, we obviously mean from the beginning of the seventh hour, but the Gemara uses the Lashon, as we're going to see. When it says the sixth hour, it means really the end of the thing. We've completed 6 hours and we're beginning the seventh hour. So bein lefnei zamanai, whether before it's time, from the beginning of the seventh hour when the carbon Pesach is brought until Pesach, bein la'achar zamanai, or leftover chametz after Pesach, over a love belav, you're over on a lav, whatever the lav is, that whatever it is going to be, whether on Erev Pesach there's a lav, as we're going to see, or obviously if you're left over chametz on Pesach, you're over by your matzah. Toich zamanai. If the chametz was then eaten on Pesach during its time, what means its time? It's time of Issa, which is actually Pesach. During its time, during its time of Pesach, the 7 days of Pesach, it was eaten the chametz. Over a lav belav, you're over on the lav of Bal Yirah Bal Matzah, the chorus and the chorus that comes along with eating chametz on Pesach. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, so are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. We now are on Chav Zayin Omid Beis 28b 1. Rav Shimon Omer. Rav Shimon says Chametz Lefnei Zamane, before its time. That means Erev Pesach, from the time it becomes Aser, from the seventh hour until Pesach. Ula'achar Zamane, and the Chametz from after Pesach that went to the ending. You're over on nothing. Nothing. On Erev Pesach, if you happen to eat the chametz, you're not over on anything. And if the chametz is after Pesach, there's no kanas, you're not over on anything. Toich Zamanoi, on Pesach itself, Shimon says, I absolutely agree. Over Allah b'karas u'balav. You're over on karas for eating the chametz, and you're over on lav of Bal Yirah, Bal Yimotzeh. So we've got a major argument over here. Rabbi Yehuda says both before and after Erev Pesach or after Pesach, you're over on a lav. Whatever the lav is before Pesach, as we're going to see, and after Pesach, you're over on a lav. In Pesach, you're over on a lav and chorus. Shimon says before and after, not all good. In Pesach itself, I agree. You're over on chorus for eating chametz, and you're over on the lav of Bal Yirah Bal Yimotzeh. Umishas Isser Ba'achila, and by the way, Mishas She'osa Ba'achila, which is from the seventh hour and on, Osa Ba'hano, you're not allowed to have benefit from the chametz either. Asya the Tanakama. Now we've come back to the Tanakama. That's the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's also the chametz from the seventh hour on. Obviously, he holds it's Osir, and it's Osir completely, because you bring in the carbon Pesach, chametz is Osir completely from eating and from having benefit. If you remember, he holds that you can have benefit, that you can feed it to the animals in hour 5, but by hour 6, already with the Rabbanon, you're not allowed to eat, you have to dispose of it, you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to have no, and by the 7th hour, biblically, you certainly can't eat it and have any no. Now the third opinion. Rabbi Yosi HaGalili Omer, Tema al atzmach, we had this before, you should wonder upon yourself, Heiche chametz osa ba'ano kol shiva. How can anybody rule that chametz is forbidden for benefit on all 7 days of Pesach? You're allowed to have anah from chametz even on Pesach. This Rabbi Yosi HaGalili obviously requires explanation, and we're going to get to it. Now the Gemara says, "Uminayin le'echol chametz mishei shoyis l'mala." And how do I know if I do eat chametz from the 6th hour on, from the end of the 6th hour, which means really the beginning of the 7th hour? When the 6 hours are complete. So every time the Gemara is going to use the word Mishei Shoyis, I'm going to say the 7th hour. Okay? How do we know from the beginning of the 7th hour and onwards until Pesach that you're over on a loisase? Okay, shenema, because it says loisaychel olav chametz. You shall not eat with it chametz. What's the it? Shaloich olav on it. That's the carbon pesach. The carbon pesach is brought from the 7th hour of Erev Pesach. So you shall not eat with it chametz. So chametz is also from the 7th hour, and that's the lav. Loisaychel olav chametz, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda's word. Amalei Rabbi Shimon. You can't. That's how you want to explain this pasuk. It's impossible. That cannot be the explanation. Because we have another pasuk that says the following words: For it says, "You shall not eat chametz. You shall not eat chametz with it for 7 days. You shall eat matzahs with it." What does the pasuk say? You shall not eat with it. For 7 days, you should eat matzahs, which means it's tying chametz to matzah. The pasuk is clearly saying, "Another chametz." You should not eat with it chametz. The rest of the pasuk of that pasuk, which is talking about the carbon pesach, chametz. You should not eat with it chametz. It's true to the carbon pesach, but the next words are shivas yomim toichel olav matzahs. You forgot, Rabbi Yehuda, to say the next words. 7 days you should eat matzah. So the Torah just went ahead and was makish and compared matzahs to chametz to matzah. Just like matzah has a 7 days, which is from the night of Pesach to the end of Pesach. So too, chametz is aser. When matzah is in play, chametz is aser. That's what it means. In Cain. If that's what you're saying, that the whole thing is only 7 days, the actual Yom Tov of Pesach, and not before. So Abizayim came, you shall not eat chametz with it. What is with it then? Elamai, it has to mean something else. Bishosh, he says, it's not talking about the Karban Pesach. It means at the time that you are now subject to the mitzvah saseh, the positive command that you shall eat matzah, which is from nightfall, because the pasuk says be'erev toichlu matzahs. In the evening you shall eat matzahs, and as we're going to see, that is our mitzvah till this day of eating matzahs on Pesach, separate from the carbon Pesach's matzah. Yeshnoi b'bal toichlu matzahs. Whoever is in the mitzvah aseh of eating matzahs is now subject to the lois aseh, to the prohibition of not eating chametz. And in the hours that you're not yet in the positive command to eat matzahs, i.e. all day Erev Pesach, on the contrary, we do not eat any matzahs on Erev Pesach, you're not in toichel matzah. There's no isra of eating chametz. That's what Reb Shimon says. So that's how you have to learn up the pasuk. Toichel olav chametz means you shall not eat with matzahs chametz. Shivas yomim toichel olav matzahs, because 7 days you should eat matzahs. So he says, Rabbi Yehuda, how can you only learn the first half of the pasuk? Toichel olav chametz, and you apply it to carbon pesach. Who says? On the contrary, the pasuk seems to say you compare it not to carbon pesach, you compare it to matzahs. And matzahs only start only at the night of the 15th, not during any part of the day of the 14th. We're on 28b2. So it says, great question. So my time of the Rabbi Yehuda. So how does Rabbi Yehuda explain this? So Rabbi Yehuda says, nah. Shimon, there are 3 psukim here that say almost the same thing. Tulasa Kroksivi. There are 3 psukim that talk about the Isser, the Loisa say, of not eating chametz on Pesach. It says, Lo yoichel chametz, no chametz shall be eaten. It says, Kol machmetzes lo yisachelu, and you shall not eat any leavening. That means anything that helps to to make it rise, any yeast, anything that has a yeast product that makes it rise. And lo yisachel olav chametz, and this part that we just said. And you shall not eat with it chametz, you shall eat on 7 days, you shall eat a matzah. So we got 3 psukim. Chad pasuk. One pasuk is talking about before Pesach. That's the last one. Should not eat with it chametz. meaning that Olav, it is the carbon Pesach. From the seventh hour, when you bring the carbon Pesach, you also to eat or have no benefit from chametz. The chad la'achar zamano, and one means chametz left over after Pesach. That's the pasuk. The previous one, the chametz laid. That's from the pasuk of lo ye'achal chametz. No chametz should be eaten. The chad l'toichei zamano, and one is for in Pesach itself. That of course you shan't eat chametz, and that's the komach metzes loisechelu. All things leavening cannot be eaten on Pesach. But Rab Shimon, what does he do with the three psukim now? Chad l'toich zemanu, one to teach us during its time, which we know already, the one that we just said. With loisechel olav chametz shivas yomim toicha olav matzes. He says, loisechel olav chametz, you should not eat with it chametz, meaning with matzes, but matzes you should eat 7 days. So that's the yom tov for Pesach itself. The chol machmetzes, the extra pasuk of chol machmetzes, all leavenings, to teach what we learned in the following brisa. Chametz, you shall not eat. The pasuk says lo ye'achel chametz, you shall not eat chametz. From that pasuk, ein li ela shenich chametz me'elov. I only know you should not eat chametz, things that become chametz by themselves, that become chametz by themselves, that rose by themselves, they became chametz by themselves. Machmas dover achaminai, but if they became chametz through a leavening agent outside of sa'ar, outside of yeast obviously has its own pasuk. Sa'ar lo nimtza b'batechem. You cannot find sa'ar in your house. You can't have it. You cannot eat sa'ar. That we do not eat. Right? And it says, what that means is, we agree. That means chametz that grows by itself, that means has a yeast product. Nachmas dover achminai, that has any other agent that gets leavened by any other agent. Let's say by apple juice. That gets leavened by apple juice. Okay? A bagel that is not made with water. It's made with apple juice. It doesn't have yeast, let's say. You got to figure out a way, whatever it is. Okay, so if you have over there, how do I know that those kind of agents are also for chametz on Pesach? Machmas daber achminayin Talmud loima kol machmetzes, all leavenings loisachel, all leavenings, kol, all lo yoichel chametz, and the actual pasuk lo yoichel chametz, you shall not eat chametz. Miboy like letani, like we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Yomi in the Pesach Mitzrayim. How do I know that Pesach Mitzrayim, the Pesach that they made in Mitzrayim, before they left, before the Exodus, before Yitzias Mitzrayim? If you remember on Shabbos HaGadol, they took the little sheep and they tied it to their beds and they kept it there for 4 days, and the Mitzrayim were gritting their teeth because these sheep, like the cows in India, with their avodah zaras, their idols. And on Erev Pesach, they went ahead and they shechted it and they put the blood on their doors, so that when Makas Bechari said, when the plague of the firstborn came, the Malach came and the angels saw the blood from the carbon on their doors, and he passed over their house. Pesach as Botev in Yisrael, that's how we get the name Pesach, right? We passed over their house. So Minayim the Pesach Mitzrayim she'enani chimitza noyeg ela b'yoyim echad. That it's chametz prohibition not to eat chametz was only for 1 day. Had 1 day of this. It wasn't a 7-day yontiv. The 7-day yontiv started in year 2, after they left Mitzrayim. Talmud loyma lo ye'ochel chametz. Chametz shall not be eaten. And right after that, v'samuch lei, and it's juxtaposed with another pasuk right next to it. Hayoim, today, ata yitzavim. Today you are leaving Mitzrayim. Today you are leaving Mitzrayim. So you see that 1 day, Hayon, today you're leaving Mitzrayim. Today is the day that you will not eat chametz. So on Pesach Mitzrayim was different than Pesach L'Doros, which we're going to get to later. The differences between Pesach Mitzrayim, the Pesach in Egypt, versus the Pesach L'Doros of all the rest of the generations. So now, Rav Shimon took care of all 3 psukim. The Rabbi Yehuda, who you use the 3 psukim differently to say it's talking about Erev Pesach, on Pesach to Pesach. Okay. Machmas dover acha minole. From where does he know that the issur to eat chametz from another agent, not just sa'ar, not just yeast, but if there's another agent that will help the bread or the dough rise, that's also in the issur of chametz. The pasuk says, "Kol machmetz," all leavenings in plural. You shall not eat. So since it says machmetz, all leavenings. Leavenings means any leavening agent. And for where is and how does he know what Rabbi Yossi Aglili taught about Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach L'Dairis? Pesach Mitzrayim was only one day. Iba, you can say, just like he does. That right next to it was the pasuk Hayoim Atem Yotzim. Today you will leave. Iba Isema Samuchim L'Dairis. He doesn't darshan. He doesn't expand every single time there are two psukim together. One is one. Was it? Shouldn't eat chametz and chametz. It happens to be today. You're going out. The lav dafka that there's a comparison. So the Gemara goes right there. We are now on 28b3. Omamar uminayin la'echol chametz mishei shoyis sulamalo. From where do I know? When one from the end of the 6th hour, from the beginning of the 7th hour and onwards on erev Pesach, shu over below say that he's over on a negative prohibition. Shenema loy soichel olav chametz. He shall not eat with it chametz. And what's the with it? The carbon pesach, which is born on the beginning of the 7th hour. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda said. Amalai Rabbi Shimon v'chiev shalayim came aloi kvar nema. The whole pasuk says loy soichel olav chametz shivas yomim toichel olav matzos. 7 days you shall eat on it Pesach the matzah. So obviously it's a comparison. So Rabbi Yehuda, Shapir Kamalei Rav Shimon. Shimon asks a good question. He didn't really quite explain this. The second half of the pasuk clearly says that the first half is connected with the second. That loy soichel olav chametz, you should not eat with it on it. Chametz shiva shem toichel olav matzah, you shall eat matzahs. Compares chametz to matzahs, just like matzah is only the 7 days of Yom Tov, so chametz is also only the 7 days of Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda Amalach, Rabbi Yehuda will say no. Sorry, it does start in erev Pesach. Ahu lukvay chayva afilu b'zman hazeh hu das. The pasuk is coming to tell us that there is a chayv, there is a chiyuv, there is an obligation even today without a Beis Hamikdash, without a korban Pesach, to eat matzahs. Because there's a pasuk that says, "Be erev toichlu matzahs." So there are in the evening you shall eat matzahs. So there are two psukim. Legabe the korban Pesach, it says, "Umatzos umeroyrim yoichlu koya korban Pesach." Tzliesh, you should burn, you should roast it. Matzos umeroyrim yoichlu, and you should eat matzahs and moror with it. So it turns out that with the korban Pesach, there is a chiyuv when you're eating the korban Pesach to put the matzah and the maror together, i.e. Hillel's sandwich. The Hillel sandwich. Zeichel HaMikdash keHillel, Kain also Hillel b'zman shebeis HaMikdash hayakayim. So did Hillel do at the time when the Beis HaMikdash was still standing. They ate it together. That's a mitzvah. That chametz, that matzah and morah. Al matzah sumeroyim yachlu. You shall eat it with matzah and morah. That's a din in korban Pesach. So, which would logically say, if there's no korban Pesach, there's no din of eating matzah or morah, which would be b'zman hazeh. Kum Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, when it comes to matzah, there's a second mitzvah. Be erev toichlu matzahs. In the evening, you shall eat matzahs. That pasuk. Where do I know that erev toichlu matzahs is not connected to the korban Pesach, but it's its own freestanding mitzvah? That besides the matzah that you would eat with the korban Pesach, you have a chiyuv to eat your own matzah from this pasuk that says, "L'seichel olav chametz shivas yomim toichel olav matzahs. For 7 days you should eat on it matzah. That is an extra pasuk of matzah. That's coming to tell us that Erev toichel matzah, the should eat, is its own freestanding mitzvah of matzah. Number one, that explains why we take 2 kezesim. One of the minhagim, as you know, at the Seder, is we lift up all 3 matzahs, we make a bracha, and then we drop the broken matzah. We still lift up 2, but you think the one leading the Seder is supposed to eat 2 kezesim if possible. A kezayis is a half a hand matzah. 2 kezesim is a whole matzah. Why does he eat 2? To be mekayim both mitzvahs. Moitzi, matzah. The mitzvah of matzah that existed today, of the Erev toichlu matzahs, of the mitzvah that is its mutually exclusive, having nothing to do with anything else but itself, to eat matzahs. And the second one is the matzah that you would normally have eaten with the korban Pesach. Al tzliesh, when it's burnt, it's roasted. Al matzahs and meroyim yochlu, you shall eat it with matzahs and maror. So matzahs has its own pasuk. What about maror? The answer is that maror today is only midorabanan, is not midoraisa. Maror, the bitter herb, was connected with the korban Pesach. No korban Pesach, there's no maror. There's no matzah either with regard to the korban Pesach. But there is a mitzvah matzah by its own freestanding mitzvah of Shivas Yomim Toichel Olav Matzahs. Which matzah? The Be'erev Toichel Matzahs. In the evening you shall eat matzah, which really means, by the way, that the chiyuv to eat matzah, in reality, is only the first night. The rest of Yom Tov, you don't have to eat matzah. You obviously can't eat chametz, but you can live on fruits. You can live on fish. You can live on all the fried stuff, or the chickens and the potatoes. You don't have to eat matzah every day. But Zok the Vilna Gaon, while the chiyuv, the obligation is the night of Chanukah, every time you eat matzah, you get a mitzvah. You get a mitzvah, a kiyum mitzvah. Not one that you have to do, but if you do it, you get a mitzvah because it says, Shivas Yomim Toichel Olav Matzah. You should eat 7 days matzah. So you get, each time you eat matzah, you get a mitzvah, but the obligation is the first night. That's what's going on. The truth is, this is not as simple as that. Because in fact, and I'm not going to go into it totally, the truth of the matter is, Rabbi Akiva Eger asked the kasha to his son-in-law, the Chasam Sofer. The holy Chasam Sofer, it's found in Yeridea, in the Shalos and Shuvas. What about the Korban Pesach today? And believe this or not, the Chasam Sofer says, since Tumas Chutra B'tzibur, like we learned before, if people are contaminated, nobody is contaminated. If everybody's contaminated, nobody is contaminated. Since we're all Tumas Meis, we're all contaminated by corpse. None of us are contaminated by corpse. So in fact, you're allowed to go on the Harabayas for Korban Pesach. Because where do we learn out the din Tumah Hutter B'tzibur? That Tumah, that contamination is mutter if the whole tzibur is like this. We learn it out from the Korban Pesach because the Korban Pesach was brought even if everybody was Tumah. Or all the Kahanim were Tumah. So he says the truth is you can go on the Harabayas. We don't have a building. The Kedusha is not tied to the building, it's tied to the place. We don't have a Mizbeach. You don't need the actual basic. We know the place of the Mizbeach. You know why you can't go? Because the Arabo laws is because the Arabs don't allow us. That's what he writes. The Yishmaelim don't allow us. And the truth is, Reb Chaim Pari, the Kesef Mishnah brings this, that one of the Rishonim, Reb Chaim Pari, actually went to Eretz Yisrael to try to bring a Korban Pesach, and the Arabs killed him. That's a true story. It's a much longer discussion. It's a very interesting, it's a fascinating discussion. I once discussed it in a Chassidish Besmedrish. You can imagine the uproar, but that is actually the halacha. Anyways, weiter. So Rabbi Yehuda Amalach, Ahu lekavaya chayva afilu bizman hazeh hudasa. It comes to teach us that there's a chiyuv to have matzah even today, because there's a freestanding mitzvah be'erev toichel matzahs. In the evening you shall eat matzahs. And how do we know this? Because Shiva Hashem, how do we know that that's what erev toichel matzahs is going on? Because Shiva Hashem toichel love matzahs. The Rab Shimon lekavaya chayva minolan. How does he know? How does he know that even today we have a chiyuv, a freestanding mitzvah to eat matzah? He says, "Nafkalom mi erev toichel matzah." Straight up from the erev toichel matzah. I got no problem with erev toichel matzah. It says it eat. You should eat matzah. That's when you have the chiyuv. The Rabbi Yehuda says, "I can't learn it out. I need this for tumah, or for somebody who's tameh on erev Pesach, and therefore by himself, not everybody. Everybody else is tar, is clean, is pure. One or two guys, a minority of people are tameh. Or they're too far away on the 14th of Nisan to bring the Pesach offering, so they would have to. That's what Pesach Sheni is all about. I would have thought, since you cannot eat the Pesach offering on that day, then that evening you shouldn't eat matzah and mora, because matzah and mora are connected to the carbon Pesach. Matzahs and mora you should eat with the carbon Pesach. So if you can't eat the carbon Pesach, you don't have a chiyuv of matzah and mora. Kamash malon. Yes, lagabe the carbon Pesach, you have no chiyuv of eating matzah and mora. But lagabe matzah, it has its own mitzvah of erev toichel matzahs, of erev that has its freestanding that goes on today, even thing. And mora is only midrabanan. Okay. Zok the Gemara with Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says, somebody who's tameh, or is too far away, doesn't need a pasuk. He's no weaker, he's no less obligated than somebody, a Jew, who's uncircumcised. Or a venecher, a stranger, that's a Jew who unfortunately is a Jew, but he holds a Avodah Zarah too. Jews for Jesus, if you want to put it that way, in today's terms. Okay, Venecha, where the pasuk says the ksiv v'chol zar, v'chol oral, v'chol zar lo yoichabay. Any uncircumcised or any stranger, meaning a Jew that keeping adultery, shall not eat from the carbon Pesach. But it says it shall lo yoichal boy. It shall not eat of it. Boy, it. Who ain't oichel? He does not eat. Aval oichel hu b'matzah umara. They eat from matzah umara. They eat from matzah and mara. Of course, they eat from matzah and mara. At night, at the Seder, when they all come to the Seder, and all Jews come to the Seder, ready called, they do eat matzah and mara. Matzah midiraisa, mara midirabona. So if that's the case, if madach, an oral, somebody that's uncircumcised, for whatever reason, and a zar, somebody who's keeping adultery, still has the chiyuv to eat the matzah and the bitter herbs. Obviously, a tameh or somebody that's too far on the way who can't bring the carbon Pesach now, but will bring the carbon Pesach in next month in Iyar and pay Pesach Sheni on the second Pesach in a month from now. Of course they have to eat matzah and mara. The Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore. So over here, the same thing. So Rabbi Yehuda, so why does Rabbi Yehuda need to teach it straight out? Rabbi Yehuda, ksiv bahai v'ksiv bahai. The obligation to eat matzah is written regarding the oral, the uncircumcised Jew, and the stranger who's the Jew that's keeping adultery. And even though it might be unnecessary, this is the simple translation, it's written regarding that one too, regarding the Tomei and the one who's too far on his way. But Efshi, you could say, according to my own thinking, that no, it had to say the same. This is what Rabbi Yehuda is really coming to say. Because there's such a thing as Pesach Sheni, because the Torah says, if somebody is a Tomei or too far on the way, and he can't make it on Erev Pesach in Nisan, I'm letting him bring the carbon Pesach on the next month, on Yud Dalet Iyar, on the 14th day of Iyar. Since he has to bring the carbon Pesach then, he then should have a chiyuv to eat the mora, matzah and mora, which he does, by the way. He does have a chiyuv to eat matzah and mora with the carbon Pesach, because tzliesh al matzah and mora rechlu says it twice in the Torah, once by Pesach Rishon, by the first Pesach, and once by Pesach Sheni in Iyar, when it brings the halachos of Iyar. So it happens to be with that carbon Pesach, he also has to eat the matzah and the mora together with, as part of the carbon Pesach. Therefore, I might think, since he has to do that in Iyar, because that's when he's bringing the Korban Pesach. I might think that he doesn't have to do anything here on the first day of on the first Pesach, the night of the 15th. Kamash that he does, and that's why we have a second pasuk. Anyways, everybody, we are now at the end of 28b4, all the way on the bottom. We made it all the way to the end of the daf.